Kia ora tātou. Welcome back to another video through the Feel Good Club. I make videos here that promote mobility and body connection and things that make us feel good in our bodies. I also have some chattier videos if you are on one of the higher paying tiers that enable us to have a bit of a conversation or just have some reflective time around wellness related topics. So I encourage you to check out all of the videos in my collection. And if you really want a deep dive into some more of those in-depth topics, consider moving up into a higher paying tier. I'm actually experimenting with a new microphone today, so I hope the audio is okay at your end. And I wanted to center today's video around ribcage mobility. So at the time of filming, it's currently the middle of winter. It's very cold outside. I'm in a t-shirt because I've got a nice big heater next to me. But generally speaking, it's been very cold, been rugged up warm. And as you can see, even just talking about it, my shoulders are raised and my neck is kind of shrinking. And so I've been seeing a lot of people with shoulder tension on the massage table, and we've been doing a lot of neck and shoulder release work because that kind of I'm cold kind of posturing is really creeping into people's lives and compounding with existing tension patterns, especially if you're working at a desk. And then there's also all of the stuff around cold and flu and being really congested. Our household, and me included, are recovering from a horrible cold flu virus that everyone got. So if I'm a bit croaky, that will be why. But it does also affect your kind of sinuses and your tension and how you hold yourself. And when you're coughing, your rib cage can get really stuck. And the rib cage is kind of, I think, a kind of forgotten about aspect of our day-to-day lives, which is kind of ironic because the rib cage houses the lungs and the heart, which are things that we need to breathe and exist all the time. And the rib cage also obviously connects into the spine, which houses the nervous system. And so there's a lot of nervous system specific stuff that's connected to the rib cage. So it's super important, but often neglected because we're so busy stretching our arms and our legs, and we're so busy like trying to stretch our neck and stuff like that. But the rib cage is actually kind of right in the center of all of it. So that's why today I wanted to just offer a bit of acknowledgement for all the work our rib cage does, and also just giving ourselves an opportunity to connect with our rib cage and think about ways that we can make it feel good and just contribute to feeling good overall. Because obviously when we free up one area, it does have that ripple on effect throughout the whole body. So the first thing that I have to talk about is the most boring thing. So bear with me if this is just way too basic for you, but is diaphragmatic breathing. It's something I've talked about before. Diaphragmatic breathing is the practice of empowering the diaphragm, which is a layer of muscle that runs in between the upper part of the torso and the lower part of the torso. And the diaphragm should, in theory, when activated effectively, pull down when you breathe in to help expand the lungs and pull air into the body. And then when you exhale, it goes back up. And that's at a very basic level what the diaphragm does. In doing that movement, it also massages the digestive organs and all of the muscles and fascial systems around it. But in order for the diaphragm to actually pump like that, the rib cage needs to actually fluctuate and have movement as well. If it's rigid, if the rib cage is in a static position, which is not what it's built for, but if it's static, the diaphragm can only kind of do so much because the pumping action is not happening globally. It's really just happening in this one muscle that's trying to do all the work. And that's going to create various issues. And it also does contribute to shallow breathing and, not to really go off the deep end and go down a different rabbit hole, but breathing patterns in the body can impact muscle tension patterns and other health issues as well. I'm not an expert in that. If you want to deep dive into that, there's actually a breathing clinic in Nelson that has some really great information about that if you want to learn about healthy ways to breathe. But to come back to the rib cage, movement is really important. Like with any part of the body, movement indicates blood flow, and which ultimately creates health and promotes function. So if my finger stopped moving, the joint in the area would have a limited blood flow and likely the finger itself. And so it's the same in the rib cage, it's the same anywhere. We want that blood flow because we want that oxygenated blood to get in there to promote health in that area and to keep that function going. So rib cage, exactly the same. It also helps to, movement in the rib cage helps to promote bringing us out of that fight or flight state. Just at a very kind of basic level, when we're in danger, the rib cage locks into place to protect the heart and lungs. It thinks it's keeping us alive, like it's really trying to do its job. But when we're exposed to stresses every day, maybe for medical reasons or other reasons, we have anxiety, hormone fluctuations can create stress and anxiety in the body, all sorts of things. When those things happen, the rib cage might be in a state of fight or flight kind of all the time, which means that it's locking in that position more and more and more. And as a result, it's not getting those nice breathers literally in between where it can move and pump, oxygenated blood throughout the body. And it's also not enabling that movement, which obviously helps the arms, the shoulders, everything else kind of stay happy and healthy and free to access. And so when the stress locks the rib cage in, then we kind of get into that cycle of like the rib cage is locked, so not a lot of movement is happening. So we've got shallow breathing happening. I hope that didn't affect my sound. I just touched the microphone. But yeah, when the rib cage is locked, it really impacts the whole system and perpetuates that cycle of fight or flight response. And so what we want to do is try to interrupt that cycle and move that rib cage, get everything else moving, and ultimately feel better for it. Before I move on to showing you some of the exercises, the other thing that I want to acknowledge is that, especially in Indigenous practices like the Maori massage practice of miri miri, different parts of the body indicate different emotional processes. And for the rib cage in miri miri, it really houses grief. So grief can encapsulate all number of things. Big emotional changes, rage, deep despair and loss, fear of loss, and everything that comes with it. And so often when we feel grief, if you've ever felt it before, perhaps I don't need to explain this, but often when we feel grief, it's like a weight on us, on our chest, on our shoulders, on this whole upper body area. And again, it's related to that fight or flight response of trying to protect yourself. And so the rib cage locks in. But also, when we cry, when we physically cry, it often affects the way that our breathing happens because of that, how that emotion works in the body. And so even if we are not physically crying, those muscular nerve responses that happen when we're crying, like the lump in our throat or the weight in the chest, can still be exhibited in the body and physically be there, even if there isn't water coming out of our eyes. And so I think in terms of, kinesiology and the way that the body integrates how we're feeling, I think that's a really interesting connection that miri miri has to grief being housed in the rib cage. And that's not to say that you have to completely be absolved of all grief in order to free up your rib cage. That's not how that works. However, when we work with the rib cage, sometimes it can bring up feelings that need to be worked through and processed, or even just acknowledged, even just, given a bit of space and a bit of acknowledgement. And so that's worth acknowledging. And if you are currently in the process of grieving, mobilizing your rib cage might be a really nice, gentle practice to sort of interact with, to kind of connect your body into that grieving process. As westernized human beings in a modern world, it's really easy to intellectualize how we're feeling. And you can go, I feel like this because of this, and this is why it's happening, and this is how it's happening. My brain's having a response, and my body's having a response, and I know all these big facts and figures in my head. But it's another thing entirely for us to embody those feelings and process them and give them the opportunity to move on. So when we do these mobility exercises, sometimes it's the best opportunity that we get to do that kind of thing. For that reason, yin yoga or other gentle movement practices can be really great for processing grief. So if any of those big feelings come up for you during this exercise, perhaps that's a little indicator that that might be something you need to bring into your more regular practices, if you feel safe to do that. The other thing I should also acknowledge is that when I work in massage on the rib cage, sometimes we can come away feeling a bit grumpy. And the reason for this is because, as I say, the nervous system is so closely intertwined to where the rib cage comes in at the back. And so sometimes when we get fascial releases in the rib cage area, it can make us feel kind of like on edge or a little bit grumpy because the nervous system has been kind of activated. And if you're used to being in that fight or flight response, then your body might not know what to do with that. And as a result, sometimes you feel a bit grumpy. However, I find that when I do self-work and when we work with our own bodies and we're empowering ourselves and having agency in the movement and the release work, the grumpiness is less so because it's coming from us rather than being imposed on us. Sometimes on the massage table, even though we might be really enjoying the massage, it's still my hands on somebody else's body, which means that their body is receiving it as an external thing coming in. So that's why that grumpiness might happen with massage, but might happen less so with the mobility work. Hence why I want to show you some of these exercises. So that you can do this from the comfort of your sofa, as you can see here. I'm on the sofa myself. And you can just sit really comfortably with your legs relaxed, feet flat on the floor. Don't cross your legs because that'll make you a bit wonky. So the first thing that I really love to do is that deep breathing, is that diaphragmatic breathing. And the best way to do it, in my opinion, is to actually place your hands on or as close to your ribcage as you can reach. I go for the simplest option, which is just to go at the front, but you can also, if you've got the shoulder range of motion, you can flip your hands around and put it on the back of your rib cage as well. And some people find that useful. Some people do one front, one back to get a bit of a sense of depth. But honestly, I think this is easiest. And then what I like to do is close my eyes because I am a visual person and I like to visualize that diaphragm expanding down and then contracting in with each breath. But if you're not a visual person, that's fine. You can close your eyes, open your eyes. It's completely up to you. And then as you take a deep breath in, I want you to feel with those hands, and obviously exhale as well, whether those ribs are actually expanding and moving. It always takes me 2 or 3 breaths even just to feel what is actually going on. Again. Now, I can see myself in the camera. So if you do this in the mirror, you might also be able to visually see what the rib cage is doing. Sometimes you can see it rising up the top. I'm exaggerating there to show you, but what that means is you're breathing up here. And while that is good that there's movement there, you actually want to move around here more than you're moving up here, if possible. Let's go again and you can observe again. Friendly reminder, your shoulders are not your rib cage. So you don't need to be doing this. That's a separate thing. This is what's moving, not this. So doing this as regularly as you can is a great stress reliever. It's a great practice for mobility. It's a great thing for your ribcage. It's just great. I especially recommend doing it at the end of the day before you sleep to bring yourself out of fight or flight before you sleep. It also helps to mobilize everything in the area so that the next day when you wake up, you're less likely to be stiff or waking up with a headache. Excuse me. The next thing that I love to do is stretching through the side of the body. This is something that I rarely find I do in my day-to-day life. I'm a parent, I am a massage therapist, I have desk admin stuff that I have to do. Rarely do I stretch this in my day-to-day life. So it's something I like to add in deliberately to get that movement happening. So I'm just going to reach over to the side and place my hand on the sofa and then reach over with the other hand. And taking some deep breaths here, keeping my shoulder away from the ear. I really feel quite stiff through this way. And the more that I reach the arm, the more that I can feel that stretch through the side of my body. One more deep breath here, and then I'm going to slowly use the weight of the arm and then pushing on the bottom arm to come back up. Of course, I'm going to do the other side. Let's go this way. Please excuse the fact that this is in profile video and not horizontal. Now you can actually continue that diaphragmatic breathing in the position because the more that rib cage moves, the more deep the stretch will be. That's the first part of rib cage, is side stretching. The next part of rib cage is actually rotation. So I have very limited rotation. After I had my pregnancy with my son, my rib cage had a hard time reacclimatizing because when you're pregnant, the rib cage gets kind of stuck because you've got a baby squishing everything up and you can't really rotate when you're pregnant. So if you have ever carried a pregnancy into that kind of third trimester where you're just really large and you've got a really large amount of weight, hanging off the front of your body, your rib cage might get a bit stuck sometimes. So this is a practice that I like to do, which is just to literally reach across on one side and do a twist looking over the shoulder. I'm going to take some deep breaths here. As I stay here, I typically find that I can go a little further around, but we're not going to force it. It's just about being gentle. Let's just do one more deep breath here. And then we're going to come back to the center. I'm just going to stay in the center for a moment because my rib cage, as I say, finds this one quite challenging. So I might just do a little bit of gentle movement kind of to wriggle around. Before I go on to the second side, here we go, taking the arm across and reaching behind. Same thing, deep breaths. I think I have worse range of motion on that first side than I do on this one. And then I'm going to just slowly come back to the middle. And then the last thing that I love to remind people that they can do in terms of the rib cage, I'm going to just shuffle forward on the couch a little bit just so I have some more space behind me, because I'm going to clasp the hands behind and open the shoulders out and looking up towards the ceiling. So this opening across the front of the shoulders is something that's really important, especially if you work at a desk a lot, or like me, have your arms in front of you a lot for the work that you're doing. You want to really open out across the front. This is stretching through that sternum, and it's also stretching through the fronts of the shoulders as well. Because I've just recovered from having a cold, I'm also kind of feeling this in my neck. When you're ready, you can come out of that. I don't do a whole lot of self-massage with the rib cage just because it's quite hard to actually access, but something that I do like to do is to find the sternum, so the bony bit directly down the center of your chest, and just pressing gently on it and finding any little bumps or lumps that you can just gently give a little rub to. Don't be too aggressive with it, just really gentle, because again, this can get quite tender, especially if you have been unwell. And it's also something that, you know, if you've been grumpy or if you're grieving, it can get quite tender through here as well, just because that emotional distress, as I say, does live in the chest, and it typically embodies that tension, especially if we're really emotional. And then I'm just going to stroke down in kind of a lengthening manner. And then now, just to compare, we're going to take one more diaphragmatic breath so you can feel the difference between when we first started and now. To me, that felt so much easier than 10 minutes ago when I first started the practice. So those are some basic ribcage mobility exercises that I strongly recommend. Again, I recommend that you do them before bed to help mobilize everything after a long day's work, but they're actually things that you can do anytime, because all of the ones that I've shown today are seated. These are things that you can actually do from the comfort of your couch at home or from your seated at your desk at work. Obviously, you might have to adapt. If you're sitting on a wheelie chair, you might want to not do the side stretching on the wheelie chair, but I'm sure you can find a chair in any workplace where you could just do a little bit of the stretching. You can also do all of this with your legs crossed and seated either on a cushion or a bolster or just directly on the floor. But I find that the chair version is a little more accessible and is a little easier and kind of more gentle. But it's completely up to you. You can incorporate these however you like. With any stretching that you do, whether you're stretching your hamstrings, whether you're stretching your neck, whether you're stretching your fingers, I encourage you to incorporate the diaphragmatic breathing and getting that rib cage moving, because the more that you can release and relax your nervous system, the more that you can release and relax the muscles in whatever stretch you're doing. And even if you don't feel stressed or anxious or emotional, or even if you don't feel like you're actively grieving anything or don't have anything to grieve, checking in with your rib cage and getting it moving is a really useful thing, because it is, in my mind, the biggest and easiest thing to just kind of neglect or not realize how bad it is, or how tense it is, because we're just so used to going on with our day, and we'll keep breathing anyway. Our breathing will just adapt if something isn't moving to keep us alive. So it can be hard to actually assess whether your rib cage is moving and is, you know, getting those full deep diaphragmatic breaths. So even if, as I say, even if you don't think you're stressed or you don't think you're grieving, this is a really cool practice that you can do to improve your quality of life experience, and also honestly just feel better about your body, and who doesn't want that? So on that note, I hope you have a really great day, and I'll speak to you in my next video. Ka kite.